Good morning. Welcome to Open Hand Farm. My name is Penny, and I am so glad you're here. If you have not been here before, let me tell you just a little bit about ourselves. Mark and I live on an acre and a half in the middle of our little city, and we have about 4,000 square feet of gardens. We have chickens, we have rabbits, and we have a new puppy who I'm trying to keep an eye on while I make this video. Elsie, you hush. She is a Pyredoodle, so she is part Great Pyrenees and part Poodle. So we are trying to make it through puppy life. She just turned 3 months old and is a Spitfire. That poodle attitude is really coming out. We have owned a poodle and we have owned a Great Pyrenees, and we are seeing the characteristics of both of them. We have 4 children and 7 grandchildren who range in ages from 21 to 1. So our life is pretty full and we love it. You'll hear me talking a lot about community during these Pantry Challenge videos because God called us to start a community in our town here at our farm. And we have a monthly community dinner, and twice a month we have a community ladies coffee group. So a lot of the things that you will see me making might be for the community. We do have our January community dinner coming up on Monday. Most of my videos will probably be voiced over because of puppy barking, but also the one thing our 120-year-old dairy barn house is not is soundproof. So my husband likes to do woodworking and things like that. So if I don't do the voiceovers, you're going to hear all the noises. So come along and let's start day 1 of the 3 River Challenge for the year 2025. If you follow me on my Every Bit Counts challenge, which is where I started all of my prep for this month and next month for the Pantry Challenge, then you will know that I complained that I did not have enough aprons because I kept having to wash them while I was in the kitchen every day doing canning, preserving, cooking, whatever. So I have a new apron. I made it this weekend and I love it because it's really long, so it goes well over all of my longer dresses. Now, I will say wearing an apron over a bulky sweater is not good for your self-image, but that's okay. You guys understand, right? So anyway, I'm hoping to do a video soon now that I have practiced making one because I kind of made it up on my own. So now I could make one and show you how I did it. So look for that in the near future because I will be making more. Well, this is New Year's Day, and we have a family tradition where we eat black-eyed peas for luck. My mother-in-law always did that, and since she's passed away, I have carried on the tradition, and my kids will come and have some, and it's just a fun little thing that we do. So I start out with 1 large onion and about 1.5 cups of carrots and celery, and then I added some bacon that I already had cooked in the refrigerator. So that gave it more flavor as the veggies were kind of sauteing there in some avocado oil. Then I rinsed my black-eyed peas, and they had been soaking for about 12 hours. I put the veggies in. I added my beef broth that I had made that is actually a beef and herbal broth for the immune system. So it's a double whammy. I do have a video on that. I'll leave a card here as well as a link in the description box. Then I added in the spices. I added some thyme some pepper, salt, and stirred that all together. Then I added some bay leaves, however many you like. Then I added a cured ham hock from a pig that we had last year. I just nestled it in so that it could cook really well. I turned it on low. I'm actually doing this the night before because my kids will come the next day and I wanted them to be done early in the day so that any time that they came, they could have some. But along with black-eyed peas, you need cornbread. So this is my sourdough cornbread. I have a video making it, so instead of going into great detail, if you want to know more about it, here, I will put a card here as well as a link in the description box for you. I didn't really get a lot of meat off of that ham hock, so I opened a jar of my canned ham and added it, and oh my goodness, this was the best black-eyed pea soup I had made in a long time. It was so good. I also decided for the day to go ahead and prepare some overnight oats so that I would have them in the refrigerator for the rest of the week. So I set aside 4 cups of old-fashioned rolled oats. These are some that I get from Azure Standard and I just love them. They are so good. I will just set those aside while I mix together all of my wet ingredients. And those included milk of any kind. I'm using almond milk and I needed 5 cups. So I had to open a new box. And to that, I added some yogurt. I really like this Fage yogurt that I buy at Costco. And we needed 2 cups of that. So I'll put that in with the milk, then some vanilla. 3 teaspoons of vanilla. Now, obviously, this is not a single serving of overnight oats. I like to fill several jars, put them in the fridge, and they last really, really well. I'm also going to add some chia seeds and get that all mixed up. And at this point, I will add my oats. I will cover it for about 20 minutes so that the oats can kind of soak up some of that moisture, and then I can put them in the jar a little bit easier. They won't be as runny.
Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing, don't mean nothing, honey, baby, free.
Now, while he continues a few more songs, I'm going to dip up my overnight oats. I like to use these little 1-cup ball jars, and I just put whatever lids I have. Sometimes I use plastic, sometimes the 2-piece, just whatever. I leave the oats plain without any sweetener in them so that I can do different things with them as I feel like I want to each morning. And this is Elsie Mae. We have her leashed to the recliner so that she doesn't go eat my house or eat something she shouldn't while I make videos. Before I have breakfast, I'm going to put some soup in the crock pot. I needed some turnips, but I remembered that I had some roasted turnips from last summer out of the garden, so I grabbed those. I also needed bone broth, so I went ahead and got some of the beef herbal immune broth that I made last year, and I really like this. I needed a sweet potato, and I think that was all we needed. So now we're going to use some avocado oil. We're going to chop up our onions and get those ready to be used. We won't use them quite yet. Then I cut apart my roast and I put it in a Ziploc bag along with some cornstarch, and that will make the crust on the outside of the meat as I sear it. So I just put it in the hot oil and let it cook, turn it over. We're not cooking this all the way through. We're just browning it. I'm gonna go ahead and chop up the sweet potato. These are purple sweet potatoes. We grew purple sweet potatoes a couple years ago, and they just grow so well that it's turned out that that's the bulk of our sweet potatoes. Now, they're beautiful when you cut them up, but I have to say, when you cook them in soup or something, they're not as pretty, but they taste delicious. So I'm going to also add some carrots to this soup, and I just want those in the bite size, about the same as the potatoes. So some of them I'll cut down the middle and some I don't. I did add a little bit more oil to my pan, and now these are browning up very nicely. So I'm just going to take these up, put them on a plate, and set them aside. And I'm going to use the oil to put the onions in, and I'm going to get those started. And as they are wilting down, I'm going to add some tomato paste, 6 ounces. And along with that, I will add some of my broth. I don't want so much broth that it's hard to work with all of this. I don't want it sloshing everywhere. So I just put about 2/3 of it in, and I'm just gonna whisk it all together, and then I will add the rest of the broth when I'm ready. So I have everything in the pot, and now I'm going to put the meat back in, and I'm going to add some bay leaves. I'm going to put the lid on, and I cooked it on low so that it would be really good by mid-afternoon. I love these bagels that I buy from Azure Standard. They are a sprouted everything bagel, and they are so good. I just have to cut them apart though, so I do it all at once. So whenever I want to use one, I don't have to stop and cut it apart. So I'm opening up some of the overnight oats, and I'm adding some of this peanut butter powder to it. I bought the powder for another recipe, and I really couldn't find a use for it. And the other day I thought, oh, I could put that in my overnight oats. So I decided to have a peanut butter and banana overnight oat bowl. And then I would go ahead and eat the bagel as well. And it was a great brunch. And I'm calling it brunch because I was up at 10 till 4 that day. And when I got done with breakfast after putting the soup on, it was 10 till 8. So I figured that was a good brunch time. Mark and I got back from our museum exhibit, so it was time to put this soup together. I took all the meat out of the crock pot, and I just kind of pulled it apart, and then I put it back in. I had some sourdough dinner rolls that I had made and froze, so I took some of those out and decided to go ahead and warm those up to go with our soup, and it made for a very tasty meal. Hey, this is day 3 of the Pantry Challenge, and I had someone ask me a question on a comment on my getting ready for the Pantry Challenge video, and they would like to know how I keep my starter going, and apparently that is something that they have tried many times and have failed to master. I started my starter 9 years ago. So today I'm going to go through just a simple plan of how I keep mine going. The first item that does help a lot is to have a scale. If you don't have one, I will link this one in the description box. It is from Amazon, and it's like $10. I don't know, something like that. So we're going to turn it on. And this is the kind of jar that I like to use. It has a very wide mouth, which makes it easy to stir. Yet it's not such a big container that I can't pick it up and pour out of it. So you're going to put your container on the scale, and you'll see it reads numbers here. Well, you don't want those numbers there. You want it to say 0 when we put our starter in, so we know how much starter we have. So we're going to push this button that has a T on it, and that is for tear. When you tear out, that means you are taking off the weight of the item on the scale so that it will come back to 0. Now I can pour my sourdough starter in my jar and know exactly how much I'm pouring in there. This is as technical as I get. This is my active sourdough starter right now. And this is the jar and what it looks like inside. You can see that there is some dried sourdough starter around the top of the jar. And it gets pretty messy, although I have used this jar for probably a week and a half, 2 weeks. And now I just want to change it and put it into a new jar because I also have more starter in this jar than I need to feed, because if I fed the amount of starter that's in here, I would probably need a gallon jar to put it in because it would just be overflowing. You can see bubbles in there. So it's doing a great job. So I know that if I put 10 ounces of starter in a half-gallon jar, when it is fed and it rises, it will stay within that half-gallon jar. If I put more than that, it's going to overflow. Right now, my scale says pounds and ounces, so I need to change that to just ounces, not fluid ounces. There, ounces. So I'm going to add 10 ounces. All right, we have 10 ounces, just a hair over, no big deal. Now what is left in this jar, I will use for pour off. That's a whole nother story, but there's lots of recipes out there for pour off, which means it's not fed. It's a little runny. See how it poured in pretty easily. It wasn't thick or fluffy. It's pretty wet. So that is what pour off is. I'm going to set it aside. And to my 10 ounces of starter, I'm going to add the same amount of flour and the same amount of water. So first though, I need to be able to see how much I'm adding of the flour. And I could just say it's gonna go from 10 ounces to 20 ounces, but I always like to tear it out so I'm starting at 0, no matter what. So now I'm going to add 10 ounces of flour. Now this is just a all-purpose, unbleached, organic flour that I buy from Azure Standard, but I absolutely love it. If you want to see what I get in my Azure Standard orders, I'll put a card here, and I'll also leave a link in the description box. Now, I'm going to kind of do something here. I'm going to go over with my flour. So it's at 10.8 ounces. And I did that because I want you to know that if you get too much flour in here, all you have to do is scoop it out. That's no big deal. And you can just get it back down. I'm going to do, that's close enough for me. And now what we're going to do is add 10 ounces of water. Now at this point, I am going to take my jar off and I'm going to put a canning jar on. I'm going to tear it off and I'm going to pour my water in here because I could take flour out if I got too much in, but it's really hard to take that water out once it's poured in this jar. I'm going to go up to 10 ounces. All right. And you can see I went over a little bit. And honestly, I don't want to go over with my water because the starter was already a little wet when I poured it in there. And if I add more water, it's just going to make it more wet. I'm at 9.9. I'm going to call that 10. That's not a problem. So I'll get the scale out of our way and I will pour this in. Now, I will tell you that I do add the water to my jar because I've done it, like I said, for 9 years. And I have learned to make sure and watch well and kind of have an idea as to how much is going to be in there. And this is filtered water. If you don't have a system at your house, you could just get an inexpensive filtered water pitcher and use that. We have a Berkey, and if you're not familiar what a Berkey is, I have a video where we put ours together and it talks about it. So I'll put a card here and a link in the description box. I always put my starter in a bowl. I use a piece of cotton fabric that I took a dinner plate, traced around, and just serge on the edges. And I use that as my cover. You want something that is breathable because the yeast in the air is what goes in and helps feed and create all of those air bubbles. So you don't want to put a solid lid on it. You could use a coffee filter or just a piece of cheesecloth, kind of different layers of that. You don't want anything that's going to have too many holes in it in case you get like fruit flies or something like that in your house. They're going to go to this and go down in there, and that's a whole mess. So you want to keep it covered pretty solidly, but with airflow. Now this will go on my counter and it will rise up. A lot of people will put a rubber band where it is, but you can see it comes to about here in the jar, and by a few hours from now, it will be all the way up to the top of the jar. Sometimes it kind of bubbles up and expands under the fabric, and I come in and I've got like a dome lid of fabric on it. So I put it in a bowl because things change. You can't always depend on the weather being the same. You can't always depend on the humidity being the same. So someday it might be nice and warm in here and it's going to bubble up and it might bubble over. Other days it might be a little chilly and it takes a little bit longer to rise. So if yours is not the same every day, don't worry about it. It just means something's different. Now I will put this on my cabinet back in my creamery room, and it will sit there for a couple of days. I am going to mix up some bread tonight to take to a friend that's been in the hospital, but I will go 2 days without feeding. That is not what the people on the Sourdough Geek Facebook page would say, but that's what I do. Sometimes, not gonna lie, sometimes it's a week before I feed it. It just sits there waiting, and then I feed it and it gets beautiful. It's so hungry, it just eats it up. Now, on days like that, I will do a different hydration. I will do like a lot more flour and a lot more water, which means I would have to put it in a bigger jar. So I don't do that very often. I normally just stick to the same ratio. That's called 100% hydration. You can tell your friends that your sourdough starter is a 100% hydration if you do it this way, where all of the ingredients are equal measurements. I hope that this has answered some questions. If anyone else was wondering how to keep a sourdough starter going, well, if you've been struggling, you should fill a jar and put it in the fridge for if something happens to your main starter you have one to fall back on. That's another thing that I do. I always know I have more in the fridge. Let me know in the comments if you have any other suggestions or if this has helped you. And I love the fact that someone asked the question. If you have a question, don't be afraid to ask it because there is no wrong question. I would love to be able to answer any that you have. And if I don't know the answers, I'll try to figure them out and we'll both learn. I'm going to be teaching a class on fermentation, so I wanted to put together some fermented onions to have on hand for the class. So I just thinly sliced up red onion, and then I'm massaging some salt into it. When it gets wet and the moisture is starting to come out of the onions, you can see how they're looking more wet now and my hands are wet. That means that it's time to put them in the jar. I went ahead and used a 1.5 pint jar and they fit in there nicely, although they have now kind of shrunk down in and would probably fit into a pint jar, but that's okay, it's no big deal. I just made sure I put everything in there, all of the salt and all of the onion, and I press it in as hard as I can. And then I add the 1/2 cup of water that the recipe calls for. You can't really see the water, but I'm gonna go ahead and press these down and you'll see the liquid that's coming up over this weight. And that just holds everything down so that it's covered with water and it won't mold. Then this lid has a little hole like in the nipple at the top, and that will automatically burp this ferment by itself. When ferments are fermenting, they have gases that need to be released, so that way I don't have to worry about it. I used a Vis-a-Vis pen and wrote the date on my plate so I can watch it and know when to put it away. For dinner, we have leftovers. We had grilled burgers and bought chips and dip because we thought some of our kids were going to be here, and we didn't even open the chips and dip. So we decided to splurge and have burgers and chips and dip. I have a couple of friends in the hospital, and I wanted to take them some soup and some bread. So I decided to go ahead and make the bread the night before. So this is after dinner on day 3. I'm just putting together some of my overnight sourdough bread. I have a full video on this. I'll leave a card here as well as a link in the description box. It is so simple for any of you who are struggling to make sourdough bread. This is the one. And you just make it the night before and then you let it sit for about 30 minutes, and then you do a little bit of fold over, and then I put it in the oven for the night just to sit there. The oven is not on, it's just keeping it a little warmer, and then I just make bread the next morning. It's so easy. Okay, it's time to harvest the sunflower seeds. This is so exciting to me to be able to harvest my very own sunflower microgreens. I had a friend give me some recently and I love them. So I decided that would be a great way to have greens throughout the 3 Rivers Challenge this year. Before I had overnight oats again, but this time I had peanut butter with homemade raspberry jam. It was delicious. Then I baked the bread. I did one of them as an experimental cinnamon sugar bread and the other just sourdough sandwich loaf. Then for lunch we used some of that sourdough sandwich loaf to make grilled cheese. I had bought Mark some caramelized onion mustard for Christmas and put in his stocking. So I went ahead and put some of that on his sandwiches. I am not a mustard person, so I did not partake. He seemed to like it a lot though. He said it really didn't taste much like mustard, but I do make an onion jam that is kind of like a caramelized onion jam, and I put that on my sandwich. So when I got those all done, I just put them in a skillet and patiently waited for them to crisp up. That is the key word, patiently. Do not rush grilled cheese sandwiches ever, or you will end up with burnt bread and unmelted cheese. This cheese didn't really melt as much as I would like it to, but I cut it a little thick. So with our sandwiches, I had recently heard of fermented apples. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. My friend Joyce Morris from Morris Patch of Heaven had talked about them in a fermenting class I went to that she was teaching, and I had to make some, and oh my word, I made 1 jar. The next time I made 4 jars because a friend of mine really likes them too. So she's over a lot and we will have fermented apples together. They're so delicious. So that made for a very nice lunch. We didn't really feel like eating much, so I pulled out this bag of chickpea crisps from Costco, and it has sweet potatoes and black beans and peas in it. And of course it's purple sweet potatoes, so I'm a fan. And then we just used those to dip some spinach artichoke dip. We had been really busy and gone to a funeral and just kind of wanted to have a simple dinner. Thank you so much for coming along today. I hope that I have made some items that look tasty to you and you could glean some ideas from. I just wanted to sneak in here for a minute and let you know that we might be not just practicing a pantry challenge, we might be going to live one for a few days. We are in the beginning of a snowstorm in our area. We have already started getting ice, and we're supposed to continue getting ice until about midnight. So the predictions for snow are later tonight, like 2 to 3 inches before midnight, and then anywhere between 8 and 16 tomorrow. So we've had a lot of friends that went to the store. We didn't have to go to the store. It was awesome. I have some pictures here that I saw on Facebook from around our area of what the store shelves look like. You guys, we need to always be prepared for whatever might come up. I want to thank Jessica for having this challenge, and thank God that I saw Jessica having this challenge a few years ago. I would never have this much food on my shelves. I would not have toilet paper. I would not have anything. We would not have water stocked up, nothing. So because of Jessica's challenge, it taught me and grew me and stretched me to have what we have today to make it through whatever it is that we're going to need to get through in the next little bit. There's a chance we could lose electricity. I don't know. So I wanted to get this video up. If you don't hear from me with the video on Wednesday, you'll know that maybe we don't have electricity. So you guys take care, and we'll do the same. Blessings on you and yours.